Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, I wanted to take another look at this pedal here, the Dimension C from Boss. Now I bought this pedal a few months ago and I haven't been able to stop playing it since. I think out of all the vintage modulations I've ever owned or played, this is probably my favourite. There is something about it that is just beyond inspiring. I absolutely love it. But Boss only made these originals for about 4 years in the mid to late 80s, so the vintage ones are very sought after and very, very expensive, if you can find one. And if you can find one, you have to be pretty sure you're going to like it before you spend the money, because you don't get much in the way of adjustability. You just get 4 buttons, and if you don't like what those buttons do, you're stuffed. So I think most people would be better off with a more standard chorus pedal where you can adjust rate and depth to suit your tastes. But I absolutely am blown away by this pedal. But it got me thinking, can we get close to the Dimension sound using other more common, cheaper, readily available pedals? So I'm going to put that to the test today. So I'm going to do 2 separate chunks of this comparison. Firstly running the Dimension C in mono, but then running it in stereo. Now, one thing that really impressed me about the C was how bright and defined the high end is, because chorus pedals, and the Dimension C isn't strictly a chorus pedal in electronic terms, but it's very, very similar. Choruses are usually quite warm and dark sounding, but the Dimension C had a really bright, chimey high end. And what it put me in mind of was the old Electric Mistress Flanger. Now, in circuit terms, the difference between a flanger and a chorus is actually very small. The flanger has a shorter delay time, so it's a more pronounced, intense effect, and it also has feedback from the output of the pedal routed back into the input. That's what the colour knob controls, and that feedback is what gives a flanger its kind of watery, sort of liquidy high end. But in circuit terms, they're very, very similar. Now, this pedal is known for having a very crystalline high end, and the Dimension C really reminded me of that. Now, I'm not going to compare the C to my original Mistress today for 2 reasons. Firstly, because this pedal has quite a substantial level drop, so it'll just sound quieter than the C, but also because this is actually worth a fair bit more money than the Dimension C is. So what I'm going to do is compare it to this, the current production Retro-Sonic Flanger. Now, I compared this to my original Mistress a few months ago, and you can adjust for that output drop using the level knob, and this has a much lower noise floor, but essentially they sound absolutely identical to each other. So first and foremost, I'm going to see how close I can get the Retro-Sonic sounding to the C running in mono, because I think the high-end content will be very, very close. But then I'm going to try running the C in stereo. Now, I thought the way the Dimension C does its stereo effect was very unique, but then I demoed this pedal here a couple of weeks ago, the Boss CE3. Now, this pedal actually predates the Dimension C by 4 years, but its first stereo mode is actually very similar to the way the Dimension C does it. So the second stereo mode is pretty much what the CE1 does. It just splits the dry sound from the 100% wet sound, vibrato essentially, puts it into 2 amps, and it sounds huge. But the first mode is very different in that it gives both left and right, dry and wet, but on one side the modulated element is flipped out of phase with the other. So the dry sound is always completely in phase, but the modulation isn't, which gives it that kind of static, non-moving effect that we know and love with the Dimension C. But also the Bucket Brigade delay chips that the CE3 uses are exactly the same ones as the Dimension C. So I think these two should be a pretty good match to each other. And in monetary terms, the price of the CE3 on the vintage pedal market is a tiny fraction of what the Dimension C is worth. So can we buy a much cheaper pedal to get a very similar effect, running it in stereo? So those are the 2 tests I'm going to do today, to see how close I can get the Retro-Sonic Flanger and the CE3 chorus sounding to the Dimension C running in mono and stereo. So without further ado guys, here we go. So there we are, folks. Now please do comment underneath, let me know what you were hearing today. I love chatting nerdy guitar stuff with you folks in the comment sections. Now, comparing the Retro-Sonic Flanger to the C running in mono, I think we could get them pretty close, couldn't we? The Flanger definitely has more of a sweep to it, because that's what the Flanger does, that kind of airplane thing. This is definitely more static sounding, because they are fairly different circuits in terms of how they do their effect. But we can definitely dial them in to sound very close. I think the high-end content was pretty much the same between them. I think the Retro-Sonic arguably had a little bit more kind of upper mid snap to it, but overall we can get them sounding very close. So if you like the Dimension sound but you don't want to buy an original, or I think of course they've reissued this with the Waza Craft edition, TC Electronic and Behringer do their own to take on this circuit too. But if you just want to have a standard modulation pedal on your board, you can get very close with something like the Retro-Sonic Flanger. Now, comparing it to the CE3, I think we can get these pedals sounding pretty much indistinguishable from each other, can't we? The Bucket Brigade delay chips are exactly the same. They're from a similar sort of year in terms of Boss production. And I think the CE3 might have a slight level drop to it. It's known for having a slight level drop, so I think it might sound slightly quieter to the Dimension C, but really not much. They are pretty much exactly the same, or at least can be dialed in to sound exactly the same. So if you like the Dimension C, but you don't want to pay for an original, but you like collecting vintage pedals, you can pick one of these up for 40, 50 quid on eBay and get 98% of the sound. It's an absolutely stunning pedal, this. I really do love it. But there we are, folks. As I said, please do comment underneath. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comment section. I love chatting with you folks. But for now, thank you ever so much for watching, folks. I hope this video was interesting and useful for you. Please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it does make a big, big difference when you subscribe. And I will see you next time. Bye-bye.